Hello, this is a review of Amazon Prime's Fallout. You know, I don't like calling it that, and I'm not going to call it again. It's Fallout. It's the Fallout TV show on Amazon Prime, which I watched recently. I have not played the game. This is a review coming from the perspective of somebody who hasn't played the games, but is familiar with them. I think I've played... I have some of them. I'm thinking about streaming New Vegas at some point soon, because I have New Vegas and 4 just sitting in my Steam library. It's a series I own some titles from, but haven't really felt particularly driven to dive into, probably because there hasn't been a new good Fallout game in like 10 years. Probably more, actually. If you're not counting Fallout 4, I know some people don't like that game. I don't have an opinion on it. I've played an hour of it. I played 1 hour of Fallout 4. I think is the extent of my Fallout experience. I have seen streamers play them and such, but all I really know about the series is 50s, 60s Americana and nuclear post-apocalypse. And the show certainly does that. The main thing that really felt like the games is they don't use the soundtrack, or not even the soundtrack. It's like the music supervision. So like putting tracks in from like outside media, you know, that were made elsewhere. It's all that 50s, 60s ink spots, like early Americana, like that period type stuff, which is very, very true to the games. I don't want to set the world on fire. That kind of stuff. Like, that song's in one of the episodes. And it works great. They took an aspect of Fallout that actually almost... They took like a sort of small aspect of those games, but recognized its significance to the vibe of the world, and particularly how it could be used very strongly in the language of, like, cinema, where, like, you have a transition sequence, or a fight sequence, or a, you know, dramatic sequence, and you can use these songs in various different ways. It's like, it's a gimmick, it's a musical gimmick that almost works better in the in the language of television and film than it does in the language of video games. And they really took full advantage of it. And that attention to, like, the small details of the game's world and how those details can enhance an experience designed around watching rather than playing is present throughout the whole show. That's what makes the show so good, in my opinion. Is the world build. So the story it tells is it's an original story. It's not based on any one Fallout game. It's a story in the Fallout world. A separate story in the Fallout world, which I think is the way to do TV show TV show / film versions of video games, is to tell a story that isn't one-to-one with any of the game stories, because then you run into the problem of how do you adapt a story told largely through a playable medium like video games into something you're only watching. It's hard to do that unless the game is already very cinematic, like The Last of Us or something. But for most games, I think that's an inferior way to do video game adaptations. Better to just make your own story that is separate from the games, but is canon to that world, and focus on, like, giving players who are familiar with it the world and characters and, like, stuff that they recognize in a cool new package that doesn't contradict anything. And from what I've heard, the show mostly does that. You know, I've seen little nitpicks online, but mostly it seems to be going over well for the fans, and it's also very accessible for a newcomer. There's essentially 3 focal point characters. There's Lucy, who is a vault dweller who comes to the surface after an event happens. I'm avoiding spoilers. And she's exploring the wasteland for the first time. She's sort of the audience POV character because she doesn't really know anything about the wasteland beyond what she's learned in her vault bunker, which is nothing. Like, she doesn't know any of the history of the 200 years that have passed as her you know, family's been down there for generations. So she's like fish out of water. You know, she's learning everything with the audience members. So I feel like she is definitely there to get newcomers to the Fallout world invested in the war. And she does a great job doing it. This wide-eyed optimism, but also very like, but also she's willing to get. You see her slowly get more ruthless, and not in a bad way, but in a like you see her grow and get stronger, and it's a really good journey to follow. Then that's one of the protagonists, and honestly, if the show was two of these three protagonists are good enough that the show could just revolve around them, and it would probably be, and it would still be a pretty great show. There's one protagonist that I think is a little. That I'm not as invested in. So there's Lucy. Then there's the Ghoul, which is this like creature. It's common in the games. I did some lore reading, but it's basically like people mutilated by the radiation, so they can essentially live forever if they just keep taking this like juice stuff. But they get more feral as time goes on if they're not constantly replenishing of this juice substance thing. So it's almost like weird, like drug addiction, like, but what's interesting about this particular Ghoul that we're following is that he has a backstory from the pre-war time that is central to the plot of the season. He's sort of an antagonist for most of this. Like, he's an antagonist to Lucy and the other protagonist because he's ruthless and brutal, and he's willing to like kill and maim and, you know, do whatever he needs to do to get what he wants, but you don't really know what he wants. You're following you've seen him before you see him before the war, and he's just this, and he's like he's a Hollywood actor who played a cowboy, and then his persona in the Fallout time, in the present timeline, is this like cowboy, is this gangster outlaw, like lone rider kind of cowboy persona that he puts on, and it becomes increasingly, it becomes more clear that that's kind of a persona that doesn't really match it doesn't really match who he was before the Fallout happened. He just kind of has taken on this character as a way to survive. For him, it's all about survival. But you, the audience, question, okay, it's been 200 years since you were alive in the pre-war time, and why are you trying to survive? And eventually characters start asking him that question. Why are you trying to survive? What happened to you? What's the connections? And the answers are very, very satisfying. They haven't all been revealed yet, but what we've gotten so far is really, his role in the story is fantastic, and Walton Goggins, the actor who plays him, the coolest character, just, you know, all depth aside, and the depth adds to this, but he is just the coolest character I've seen in any piece of media in a long time. Like, there's a scene with him in the last episode in particular where he quotes something back that, like, another character was telling him about another character had been talking to him about his movies, and he, like, quotes back the line from his movie and is like, I remember you. Basically, when he meets somebody else that's also 200 years removed. That's as vaguely spoilerific, as spoiler avoidant as I can make that. But and he's like in shadow, and you see the brim of his like cowboy hat. It's awesome. He has so many awesome moments, and he like, the performance can go from intimidating, because he's also playing the pre-Fallout version of his character, who's like, you know, a much kinder soul. So it's like, it's just so fascinating to follow him and see how he gets it. He's immediately the most interesting character in the show. And that's saying something, because Lucy, who I would consider kind of the main one, the audience surrogate one, she's really interesting in depth too. There's also the third protagonist, who is probably my least favorite, I think he just doesn't have as interest. He might be the one with the storyline that's most dependent on having played the games, because he's a member of the Brotherhood of Steel, which I know is, I've heard of that because it's a prevalent group in the Fallout world and in the games. But the TV show, this is the one place where I think they don't exactly give you enough to care about the Brotherhood of Steel just on your own, and you don't necessarily need to care about the Brotherhood to care about this character, because he's kind of a loner who doesn't always necessarily do what the Brotherhood of Steel wants. I think the real sticking point for me is his acting is fine, but he's up alongside Ella Purnell as Lucy and Walton Goggins as the Ghoul. They're both like giving such great performances that the guy who plays the Brotherhood dude just doesn't quite match up for me. I'm not uninterested in his storylines, and I think he especially shines once he pairs up with Lucy, which it's kind of a spoiler, but also something that, is sort of... There's 3 protagonists. Eventually, they're gonna meet up. Like, I don't consider that much of a spoiler, but his character's still good. It's just, like, his of the 3 storylines, his is like a 7 out of 10, and the other 2 are operating at, like, 9, 10 out of 10 storylines. So his is definitely the weak, but there's also a 4th subplot that you almost don't, like, expect from the first... Like, she leaves the vault after the first episode, and this is getting into very minor spoilers. She leaves the vault after the first episode, and then a couple episodes later, we jump back to the vault. And there's a storyline involving her brother, and he essentially becomes a sort of secret 4th deuteragonist, because we're following... we follow his subplot for the rest of the season, and it ties into the overarching mystery. There's not... At first, it doesn't really seem like there's that much of an overarching mystery, but the way they bring the pieces together in this season is so satisfying, and it did leave me, like... I think I watched the last 2 or 3 episodes all in one sitting, because I was just so, like, show me what's going on. Show me what's going on in the vaults. What's happening? Like, the vault subplot went from being... why are we focusing on this, to, like, very interesting very quickly. So I'd say if you're like, why... Like, give that plotline a little bit of time. It'll draw you in. And it all comes together in a very satisfying way that also leaves a lot of questions for the next season. Leaves a lot of doors open. I'm so excited for a season 2 now to see where this goes. And I believe it's already been renewed because it was pretty successful. It also looks gorgeous in a way where it looks expensive in a good way. Like, I'm like, this could not have been cheap. This had to have been like a pretty high... This is like high budget TV. Just in terms of realizing the world, there's so many like landscape shots of this apocalypse world, and like detailed, interesting visual landscape shots that like when she first comes out of the bunker, they do a huge landscape shot, and you can see the boardwalk in LA in the back, and that's how, because before this point, I don't think they ever said where... I don't think they ever said before that point in the episode where the story was taking place. And then she comes out and you get this crazy like landscape shot of like desert crusted over, like, and you can see the city in the background. It genuinely left me looking at it like, how did they do that? What was I talking about? My camera battery died. The gorgeous cinematography of Fallout. Like when she first emerges from the bunker, and you don't know before that point that it's California, and they don't put any text on screen that says, yeah, this is LA, this is California. They just do this like this gorgeous pan over shot of the wasted desert, and you see that boardwalk and the Ferris wheel, and you're like, oh, that's LA. That's an LA scenery. We're in Los Angeles, but just like run down. And then of course later they give more details about the locations, but it's like in that moment, it's just they a great looking show that also uses its shots to tell the story of its world, to give the lore of this setting. And there's just a lot of stuff like that throughout the show. I don't even want to go that much more into it. I'm kind of annoyed that my camera battery died because I really didn't have that much more to say. It's just a really good show. It's just probably the best show that the best video game show this year. We'll see if anything can beat it. I haven't seen the Knuckles show on Paramount Plus, but I don't think it's beating it. Yeah, just really great video. I probably set second place only to Arcane in terms of video game shows that I've seen. Maybe I don't know about The Last of Us. I think I don't really like The Last of Us IP that much, so I'd probably prefer Fallout. But like, Arcane's the only one I could think of that has been better for me. And even Arcane feels so disconnected from the actual, like, League of Legends game that doesn't even really feel like a game adaptation. Fallout's, like, very clearly a game world. There is a particular character that reappears a couple times in the Wasteland who I'm like, this is a kooky Bethesda NPC. This is a weirdo Bethesda NPC, because this guy's just weird, and he's not really a major part of the narrative. He's just some guy in the Wasteland. But they did so good. I think by telling their own story, they were able to really distill... They were able to really capture the world while telling a super, super interesting story that, from my understanding, does some things the games themselves have never done. Like, I don't think the games have ever used the ghouls to the concept of ghouls, people who, you know, were exposed to the radiation, to tell this story, to tell a story about, like, the pre-war, and then tie it into what's happening in the, like, in the Fallout world, in the apocalypse, and, like, tie those things together and tie it in with the mystery of the vaults, and it's just... I could talk a lot more about it. If you want to see a spoiler video about Fallout, let me know. I don't really want to go deep into spoilers here. I just want to tell you that you should watch the Fallout show. It's really, really, really good. Whether you're a fan of Fallout or not, it's some great television. That's all for this video. Arrivederci!